I'm Josh Key with Beech Island Timber, and I want to welcome you to the 2019 Top Logger Update. Each year that we live, this world gets a little faster, and if we don't stay on top of our game and learn something new, then we'll get left behind. I think that for logger training, we got a lot of young people coming up that we hope are going to be involved in this industry. So if we don't train these young people to learn what we've learned over the years from the hard knocks, then we're not doing our job, for our future children. Any career, not just logging, any career, if you don't go at it wholeheartedly, you're not going to ever make it in anything. If your heart's not into what you're doing, then I advise you not to be involved with logging or any find where your heart leads you, and that's where you need to go. But as far as in the logging industry, I think you have to have a pretty strong mind, and it takes time and it takes years to learn it, and you got to be willing to want to learn it if you're going to be involved in it. I think what's important to me with the logging industry is we need to carry ourselves as professionals, and we're in the public eye. We're under the microscope all the time. But between the billboard lawyers and anything else that can come along, we need to set a presence that people will understand what we do, and we're not just out here raping the land and pillaging things. We want to do a good job for our industry in a whole, and at the end of the day, when people look back on what we've done, we're growing timber, we're making things happen, and trying to be good stewards to the land. This year, the top video will cover the right to practice forestry, power line safety, dash cam info, and more. I hope you find some useful information from this video today.
The right to practice forestry is one of the most powerful tools we have in South Carolina to limit how counties and towns regulate forestry activities. But it's important to understand that not all forest lands qualify, not all forestry practices are covered, and invoking this law can impact what a landowner is allowed to do on their property for years to come after harvesting. This recent timber harvest almost didn't happen. Initially, the county said this land is not zoned for forestry, but with a little bit of communication and education about the right to practice forestry law, this harvest was allowed to move forward. We're seeing more and more county and town governments shutting down logging jobs and restricting logging trucks. You need to be familiar with the Right to Practice Forestry Act before you find yourself in a situation where you need it. The proper title in the South Carolina Code of Laws is Local Regulation of Development Affecting Forest Land. And the heart of this law is that a county or municipality must not adopt or enforce any ordinance, rule, regulation, resolution, or permit related to forestry activities on forest land. That's very clear and strong language, but where exactly does it apply? First of all, the law covers generally accepted forestry practices, including harvesting, site preparation, tree planting, burning, use of chemicals, road building, and more. To qualify for protection, the property must meet at least one of 5 criteria. The more criteria that are met, the stronger the case for protection. Those criteria are being assessed as forest use for property taxes, have a written forest management plan, be certified through Tree Farm, Sustainable Forestry Initiative, or Forest Stewardship Council, be in a conservation easement, or be in full compliance with South Carolina's best management practices for forestry. At this site inside town limits, the landowner was using a combination of mechanical and chemical treatments to control understory vegetation. That's a fairly common practice in areas where the smoke from prescribed burning can be a problem. In this case, the town shut down the operation and demanded the landowner get expensive landscaping permits. In this case, the right to practice forestry did not apply because there's already a master plan for development in place for this property. Any activity associated with the conversion of forest land to development or other land use will not qualify for protection. The right to practice forestry is intended to protect long-term forest management on lands that will stay in forest use. This ensures that forestry will be regulated at the state level rather than locally. Not only do you need to know the landowner's intentions before you use the right to practice forestry law, the landowner needs to know before you invoke this law on their property. If the right to practice forestry is used, then the county or town may deny any building permit, site development, or subdivision on the property for up to 5 years. The landowner needs to make that decision. In addition to the law itself, we have strong support from the Attorney General of South Carolina. The Attorney General issued an opinion that clarifies application of the law and strengthens our legal position for any case that might be decided in court. Among the Attorney General's conclusions, counties and towns may not require buffers of any kind, they may not require compliance with best management practices, may not regulate the use of public roads or require permits for access to public roads, and may not apply tree protection standards to forestry activities. The right to practice forestry is a powerful tool and not one that we want to abuse or take lightly. Make sure you understand the law and how it may apply in your situation. In most cases, when local governments stop forestry operations, it's from confusion and lack of knowledge. Most local officials are unfamiliar with forestry practices and may mistake logging for land clearing and future development. Sometimes local governments simply want to control land use and collect fees for permits. In a few cases, we encounter the anti-forestry belief that timber harvesting is a harmful practice that simply should not be allowed within their jurisdiction. Sometimes we need to educate our local officials about the importance of forestry for our economy, our environment, and our quality of life. We need to remind them about the scenic beauty, the wildlife habitat, the clean air and water, and other benefits that all come from working forest lands, and that yes, sometimes we need a timber harvest every 25 or 30 years to make it economically viable to keep that land forested. Sometimes we have to fight and take legal action. We have to make sure that any landowner planting trees today will be able to manage and harvest that resource in the future. We need that guarantee to sustain our industry, and we need that guarantee to sustain our forest. I hope this information will help you better understand the right to practice forestry and how it may apply in situations that you encounter.
If you are ever working near power lines in a transmission or distribution corridor, you need to take special precautions and be extremely careful. Safety is key. The first and most important step is to contact the local utility company and report your location. Let the utility company know your timeline and when you will be operating within or near a right-of-way. Typically, the utility company will send a representative to your location to be your contact and provide you with information to help you work safely around the power lines. The utility representative will determine what protective measures need to be in place to protect the utility assets. Utility companies perform maintenance and inspect power lines and corridors to reduce the risk of outages.
Here at Duke Energy, like most utilities in the country, we have crews that try to keep the vegetation clear to maintain our right-of-way. Most utilities perform periodic maintenance inspections from the air and on the ground. Inspections may also be done on an as-needed basis.
Loggers also need to be careful not to damage power lines or poles. If you do damage power lines or poles and an outage does occur, the logging company will be held responsible for the cost of repairs and the loss of revenues from the businesses that are affected. You need to be aware of your surroundings at all times. Now, let's address specific safety actions you can take while working around and in a power line corridor. Do not place your logging deck near a power line right-of-way. It should be placed a safe distance from the edge of the right-of-way. A recommended distance of 300 feet from the edge of the power line right-of-way is suggested, with a boom length of up to 30 feet and a log reaching up to 100 feet. This extra distance gives you a safe operating distance. Traveling within a power line corridor is not recommended. The utility representative should review and may approve any right-of-way crossing. Vehicles and equipment should never be parked within the corridor. Always keep a safe working distance from power lines. Complying with OSHA rules and other standards is a minimum starting point, but additional clearance may be needed for safety. Keep a safe working distance from power lines. Heat can cause the lines to sag and the line-to-ground distance does change, as much as 6 feet. Extreme heat will not only cause the line to sag, but damage the line itself. The recommended distance is 1.5 times the height of the power structure. Keep in mind that on the log deck, you might be working with trees that are 90+ feet in length, and you need to take that into consideration when placing your deck near any power lines or transmission corridors. Physical barriers such as walls or fences should be established if the utility representative advises. Skidding operations may not take place within a right-of-way. It is also not permissible to skid through a power line corridor. The forester and/or utility representative will review and may approve any right-of-way crossing. Skid no closer than 25 feet from any transmission tower or power line distribution center. Also, when you are working near energized electrical lines, have one of your crew members serve as a power line spotter to ensure that the location of the line is communicated to all ground personnel at all times, to allow all crew members to maintain proper distances and take all required safety precautions. When you are conducting your timber operations close to the edge of a power line right-of-way, fell your trees away from the right-of-way. Always be aware of your tree length and the distance to the power lines. Also, be aware and cautious of bounce back while cutting near a power line right-of-way. Identify and be aware of all guy wires and anchors prior to logging. Guy wires and anchors are used to support poles and structures. Making contact with a guy wire or anchor can cause a system failure. In many cases, they can be hidden or covered in vegetation, making them difficult to see. The best way to identify guy wires and anchors is to look at each structure and notice any lines or wires coming off the pole, and follow these to the ground or other surface where the anchor is located.
Loggers should never fell a tree toward or into a transmission corridor. We don't want trees to fall on lines or have any chance of causing an outage. If there is a tree that cannot be safely felled while maintaining 100% control, you need to contact the local utility owner. They can explore options such as topping the tree.
Staging your tracks and loading of timber near a power line right-of-way can be hazardous to you and your equipment. Look for any power lines in the vicinity of the load you're about to tie down. It could be deadly if you throw your tie-down strap or chain over a power line. All strapping and tie-downs should be done outside the power line right-of-way. Always be aware of your surroundings before you begin strapping and tie-downs. Downed power lines are extremely dangerous. Always consider a downed line energized. If you encounter a downed line, evacuate everyone from the surrounding area and notify your utility representative immediately. You may not be able to see where the line is on the ground. It might be buried in dirt or hidden in trees or ground vegetation, so you must be extra cautious. A downed power line poses two electrical hazards. The first is called step potential. The larger the voltage of a downed line, the larger the area of ground that has been energized. It is hard to measure voltage, so be cautious. Keep a safe distance of over 50 feet. If you ever find yourself in an energized area, you want to make sure one foot doesn't fall into a different voltage zone than the other. Electricity spreads out through the ground like ripples made from a pebble dropped in water. The voltage is highest in the ring closest to where the power line is touching the ground and decreases with distance. Exit the area by hopping with both feet together or by shuffling your feet together. The next hazard is touch potential. A downed power line can actually energize any material it comes into contact with. It's not just metal that can be energized. Fences, buildings, construction equipment, ropes, chains, and even tree limbs can become energized as well. If possible to do in a safe manner, tape off the energized area, stay back, and keep others away. Immediately notify dispatch of the location. If you're with somebody who gets an electrical shock and is injured or unconscious, do not approach them as you put yourself at risk. Call 911 and notify them of the situation and your location. You need to contact the utility representative after calling 911 to ensure that the power is disconnected. The line must be grounded to provide total protection. Once the line is de-energized, you can rescue and treat the injured person. If you ever find yourself inside a vehicle that comes into contact with an active power line, remaining in the vehicle is the best way to avoid being shocked. Stay calm. If you attempt to exit the vehicle, you may be injured. Call dispatch immediately and let them know about the situation. Warn others nearby to stay away and not approach the vehicle. The only time you would consider exiting the vehicle is if it is on fire. If you are in this scenario and you must leave an energized vehicle, jump clear when exiting the vehicle and avoid touching the vehicle and the ground at the same time. If any part of your body touches the vehicle and the ground at the same time, you are at risk of electrocution. Remember, electricity spreads out through the ground like ripples in water. The voltage is highest in the ring closest to where the power line is touching the ground and decreases with distance. When you jump, land on both feet at the same time. Keep your hands and arms close to your body. Remember, you cannot touch the ground and the vehicle at the same time. Once you've landed on the ground with both feet, either hop or shuffle your feet together and move away from the vehicle. If the ground is wet, double this distance. Electrical burns are deeper and more extensive than surface burns. That's because an electrical burn will pass through human tissue at 5,000 to 10,000 degrees. Avoid contact with power lines at all times. Be sure you have contacted the local utility and that it has sent a representative to be your contact during logging. Never place a logging deck or any equipment in or near the transmission corridor. Be aware of the location of all power lines during your operation. Assume all downed power lines are energized. Always notify the utility if you find a downed power line. Please follow these practices to reduce your risk when operating around power lines.
I'm Patrick Kiesel. I'm Assistant Professor of Forest Operations at Clemson University. I usually teach timber harvesting, forest operations, and wood procurement classes. Today, I'm actually talking about what effect can you as a logging crew have on the monetary gain of landowners. So basically what I want to tell you about is some reasoning behind landowners coming up to you and being mad, or being out there on the harvest site and looking at what you're actually doing, and then tell you a little bit about how stand damage that you may cause or how merchandising can affect the bottom line of a landowner and how much money he can make or lose with that. Now let's talk a little bit about stand damage. When I look at stand damage, I basically categorize it into 4 different categories. Low damage levels, basically just a bark scuff. Low damage usually doesn't prohibit tree growth or anything. You don't lose any money with it, so usually we ignore that part. But then you have medium stand damage or medium tree damage where the bark is removed but you have no wood fibers exposed. So sometimes your turn trees look like that, all the bark is gone, you just have wood exposed. High damage is when the cambium is broken, you have wood fibers exposed, so maybe your fellow muncher nipped a little tree, you see the wood fibers coming out. And then you have severe damage where for whatever reason the tops actually broke. Maybe you cut a tree, the trees come down and then they break another top of another tree and then you have no crown left. So that's severe damage. All this damage, if you look at the slide that I have here, basically I'm showing you what the variation can be. So I looked in 5 different sites and kind of compared, how much stand damage there was after a commercial thinning. And it ranges anywhere from 10% stand damage to over 30% stand damage. And that damage is basically the number of trees damaged per acre that are left, the percent of the trees left. So we have that. And even if you take out the low damage levels, you're still ending up somewhere between 8 to 25%, so up to a quarter of your trees going to be damaged. And it differs from one logging crew to another logging crew and from one job to another job. Now, what does it mean in terms of the loss in value? So the next graph that you see here, the next slide here, shows you a simulated stand, a loblolly pine plantation, site index of 75, so something that you would see in the upstate of South Carolina. And then you see 4 different bars that represent 4 different damage levels, 5% of the trees damaged, 10, 15, and 20% of the trees damaged. And in terms of the revenue that has been lost because of the damage, when we assume that every damaged tree at the time of the second thinning ends up as a pulpwood. So in terms of percent, it's only between 1 and 6% that you would actually lose. That's the value. Doesn't sound like a lot, but when you scale it up to a 50-acre harvest tract, it's somewhere between $3,000 that you would lose with a 5% damage up to $12,000, $13,000 when you have 20% of the trees damaged. So for a landowner, that's a lot of money. You have $3,000, you have $20,000, or you lose it. So that's one of those things. All right, so what is an acceptable level of stand damage? We all know that whenever you do a harvesting operation, there's going to be stand damage. There's just no way to avoid it completely. But I think what we can agree on that it should be as low as possible. And talking to a lot of foresters and landowners, and what has been seen out here is that a 5%, so 5% of the standing trees left after thinning, if that's the number that's damaged, that's acceptable. Maybe up to 10%, but the smaller the better. So let's agree that we can work with a 5% stand damage. That's just what your top logger, that's the best that you can do. Now, how much damage can you actually sustain, and how much does it cost you? Or how much money would a landowner lose with certain levels of stand damage? Now we said 5% stand damage, that's normal, that's your baseline, everybody will do that. But let's say your landowner has the choice between choosing somebody that can create 5% stand damage or somebody that maybe creates 15% or 20% damage. What would be the difference in stumpage that the landowner would have to receive to actually break even. And with stand damage levels of more than 15%, the landowner basically would need $4 more per ton for every product coming off of the land to actually break even. If you look into 30% damage, you would need more than $6 or $7 per ton extra to break even. So that just shows you that every percent of damage, every tree that's damaged can have a huge impact on the landowner's bottom line. And basically it's about $3,000 on a 50-acre tract for every 5% of damage that you cause. So maybe what's important to say here is that if a landowner comes out to a harvest site, take the time to talk to them. Explain to them in 5 minutes why this tree is all messed up, why you have a bunch of these trees all skinned up, and why it's important for you to have them so you can prevent other trees from being damaged. And then, just also let them know that at the end of the harvest, you will remove those trees. They will end up in the product piles, the landowner will actually get money for it, and everything will be fine at the end of the harvest. So we have talked about stand damage and how that can affect the bottom line of the landowner, and how little damage can have huge effects, and a huge impact on the bottom line of a landowner. Now let's talk about merchandising and how merchandising individual trees and the total stand can affect, however, how much money a landowner can make. Now with merchandising, we know, and I'll show you in a minute here, that improper merchandising can affect your bottom line significantly. Now merchandising is a skill, and I don't need to tell you that, you all know that. It's a skill and it needs to be learned and trained. You don't just jump into like the loader and start cutting and merchandising perfectly. You learn it, you get trained, you learn basically through your mistakes. Now if you look into the slide that you see here, I looked into the value of one tree. Let's say we have a 40-foot pine and we'll get 24 feet of pulpwood out of it and a 16-foot chip and saw log. We can discuss all day long whether or not, in your specific region, these specs would work, but let's take it as an example and see what happens with that. If I take the stumpage values that I have that are from TimberMart South, these are South Carolina statewide averages, they're fairly high. They're like $12.44 for pulpwood, $18.94 for chip and saw. But looking into the length of the wood and the weight of the wood, that one tree, 40-foot length, is worth about $9.05. Now what happens if we say we don't cut out that chip and saw log and we just merchandise for one product? We throw that whole 40-foot into our pulpwood pile. Well, if we do that, that value of the tree is reduced to $6.97. So that's about a $2 difference on one single tree. Now we all know when you do timber harvesting on a per acre basis, you're not cutting one tree, right? You're cutting multiple trees. Let's say we do a thinning and we cut 150 of those trees per acre. If you look into the numbers on that presentation slide here, 150 trees fully merchandised, that's about $1,400 per acre in stumpage. If you don't merchandise those trees, if you say, I don't cut out that chip and saw, I just put everything into pulpwood, you end up with about $1,000 per acre. So there's like over $300 in difference per acre, and if you would scale it up to a 50-acre tract, you're basically losing the landowner $15,600, just like that. If you look into a percentage value of the total stand there on 50 acres, those $15,600 that we just lost, that's about 23% of the total value of the stand. So that's a quarter of what the landowner could have made. That's just lost because we didn't merchandise, we didn't take that extra time to take that chip and saw log out of the total tree. Now, what are some other ways to do some improper merchandising? Sometimes, maybe you put saw logs in the chip and saw pile or in the pulpwood pile. I'm not saying that you do that, but it may happen. And if you don't know that merchandising can have such a huge impact on the bottom line for the landowner, it may happen that you don't pay too close attention. It may happen that your logs move into the wrong pile. Maybe your operator, has a bad day, he's not paying attention, and it just moves into the wrong pile. That can cost a lot of money to the landowner. Another way to do improper merchandising would be wasting product by merchandising for a high valued product instead of merchandising the whole tree. Like at the beginning I said, maybe you have the best interest of the landowner in mind and you want to merchandise for the highest valuable product. You say, all right, I can do pulpwood or I can do chip and saw, or maybe I do a combination of both. But if you as a logger or the operator, you're in the equipment, you say, you know what, chip and saw is worth more money than pulpwood. So I want to try to maximize the amount of chip and saw I get out of one single tree. And maybe I have this 40-foot tree that we just talked about, and instead of getting 24 feet of pulpwood out of it and only one 16-foot log of chip and saw, maybe there's a way to get out a 32-foot log of chip and saw and then end up with, about an 8-foot piece that would be pulpwood, but we all know nobody will take that 8-foot log, so we just leave it in the woods. We just bring it back in, we're not using it, we're not merchandising. But in our minds, we did the landowner a favor, right? Because we merchandised for the highest value product that is out there. That would be chip and saw. Now, if you look into the slide that I have here on the screen now, if I fully merchandise for pulpwood and chip and saw, the tree value is about $8.37. If we only merchandise for chip and saw with that 32-foot log of chip and saw, we now have a tree value of $7.98. Now that's only a 40-cent difference. Maybe not as bad, but let's scale it up to 150 trees per acre. Then we're ending up with about a difference of $60 per acre. So those 40 cents, they don't sound a lot for one individual tree, but once you look on a per acre basis, the number's getting larger. $60 per acre, that's a 5% loss of the total value. Now the best way to avoid any issues, in my mind, is communication. Communicate to the landowner what you're doing, why you're doing. If a landowner comes out, he shows that he's interested. If you never see a landowner on your harvest site, he's probably not too worried about that. He may be not educated enough and doesn't want to know about it. But if a landowner comes out, take those 5 minutes, tell him what you're doing, maybe show him what you're doing and how you're merchandising and why you're doing what you're doing. And those 5 minutes, they may help you, prevent a lot of trouble later in the long run. Because the landowner understands what you're doing and doesn't think that you don't have his best interest in mind. Now, who's going to check what you are doing on any given harvest site? Will it be the landowner or will it be the forester? Who should actually be doing that work? Now let's think about it, the landowner. Landowners in South Carolina, they have different levels of education in terms of forestry. Some of them are very engaged in forest management and forestry training. They take all kinds of workshops and they probably know a lot and they can talk to you on the right level and understand what you're telling them, and they may see something out there that they think is not right. But in general, the landowner usually doesn't have a 4-year degree, doesn't have the education that a forester would have, may doesn't know what is going on in terms of laws and regulations and everything else. So what the landowner should do when he sees something should basically notify his consulting forester if he uses one. They can talk to you as a logger, get some more information, and that's the communication part that I was stressing early on. But in general, they should notify the forester, and then the forester should come out and see what's going on. In my personal opinion, I believe that a forester, when he's hired by a landowner, should be out there when you start up your logging operation, should make sure in the first few days that you're actually cutting to the prescription that the forester has laid out, that the forester wants to see on the ground. And if there's anything that needs to be adjusted or changed, it should happen in the first 2 or 3 days. The forester shouldn't let you on the property and then disappear for a week. That's not how it works, because if you do something that wasn't exactly the way that the forester had in mind, in 1 week you can cut a lot of timber. You can damage a stand significantly, cut more trees than necessary, and then create some long-term issues for the landowner. You may not see them, but the landowner and the forester will have to deal them for the next 20 or 30 years after you cut the timber. Because remember, you are providing a service to the landowner as much as the landowner is hiring you and providing a service to you to keep you in business. So it's this mutual agreement. So if you can't work well with each other, don't be surprised if one of you needs to leave. The last piece I want to talk to you about is, who do landowners in South Carolina contract their logging job to? A year and a half ago, I have done a little survey among landowners in South Carolina and asked them, how do you choose the logging contractor that's working on your property? And I gave them 4 options. Do you do your own research? Look them up, ask other people about how that logging crew is doing. You use somebody that you used previously? Do you go with the recommendation from a consulting forester? Or do you go just with whoever is associated with your highest bid when you do a timber bid? Now what came back is that we have basically 2 groups of landowners in South Carolina. We have the ones that use a consulting forester to do the forest management for them, and we have landowners that don't use a consulting forester. They basically manage the timber their own. They do everything themselves. Now if you look at the slide that I have up here, it shows you that the group that uses a consulting forester, about 60% of them use a logging crew that has been recommended to them by their consulting forester. This is important to know. This means that if you have the reputation of being a good logger that respects the land, does a job well, you don't cause too much stand damage, and you're reasonable with whatever you do, well then you get recommended to other loggers. So word of mouth gets out, and you may end up with another logging job and another logging job because you have a very good reputation. It's only about 30% of the landowners that actually go with a logging contractor that's associated with the highest bid. But landowners that do their own forest management, they don't use a forester, those are those brown bars in that screen here, about half of them do their own research or use a logger that they used previously. That's the reputation part. If you have a good reputation, they ask their neighbor, they ask their friends, they maybe ask a forester. Your name comes up and you may get invited to cut that piece of timber on their property. About 30% of them go with the recommendation that they have either from a forester or from a friend, and only about 20% go with the logging crew that's associated with the highest bid. So there's this big difference between landowners that use a forester, that rely heavily on recommendations, and landowners that manage their own timber. But at the end, it all comes down, if you do a good job, you're honest, you get a good reputation, you will for sure end up with another logging job, and you may even go back on the same property or with the same landowner on their land base. Why do you as a logger need to know about this information that I just shown you? Why do you need to know about how much money it can cost to a landowner having all different stand damage, having issues with merchandising? I want you to understand that you are in the position to make a lot of money for the landowner or lose a lot of money for the landowner. Stand damage can happen any day. It happens in a hurry. A tree falls down and you have a little bit of an opening, you have a wound in a tree. It doesn't even look like a lot. And it doesn't cause an immediate effect. It causes an effect 7 years from now, 10 years from now, when you're long gone. There will be rot in the tree is no longer a sawlog, maybe it ends up in pulpwood, so you're losing a lot of money. Maybe with merchandising, you have the best interest for the landowner in mind, and maybe that's what you do. You always try to merchandise for the highest valuable product. But maybe that's not the best way to use a tree. Now I want you to think about this and to understand it, what position you're in and what you can do and cannot do, and how whatever small it is you do or you think it may be can have effects on the landowner and the bottom line and the money that landowner will make in the future. Loggers are true professionals. I think I can appreciate that. I teach forest operations to my students in class. I teach it to landowners. I visited a lot of harvest sites here in South Carolina. I brought my students out to harvest sites. And I can really say, and I ran some of the equipment myself just for 5 minutes, but I have a total appreciation for what you guys do day in, day out in your logging equipment, getting timber to the landing, process it, and getting on a truck. So I just said you're all true professionals, and I want you to know that within the broader forest industry, loggers are valued. We as foresters, mills, landowners, we may not show it every day, but you are appreciated and you are a very necessary and a very welcome unit of the wood supply chain. If we wouldn't have you, nothing would happen in terms of forest management. Timber wouldn't be growing as well as it's growing now. Mills wouldn't be producing what they are producing now. We wouldn't have the paper. We would have limited supply of saw logs and boards. Houses couldn't be built. So you are a very important part. You're very much appreciated. And I want you to know that and end my presentation with this.
In this video, we are going to demonstrate how to construct an easy bar. The easy bar is a technique that evolved from years of forestry best management practices training with loggers and foresters in Maine. Understanding nothing works every time, everywhere, the technique we are going to show you can most often be executed with forestry equipment already on site, and is just one more tool that you can add to your BMP toolbox. The key technique that is unique to the easy bar is that half of the water bar is installed headed downslope and the other half is installed headed upslope. We will explain in a moment. First off, a water bar is essentially a diagonally installed ditch with a berm on the downhill side that's intended to capture runoff water headed down the trail and divert it completely off the trail into the residual stand. To do this successfully, a water bar must have 5 quality attributes. The inlet. The inlet should start well off the trail so water doesn't get around it. The ditch depth. The depth must be consistent in depth and grade in order to direct the water. Mound height. The mound height must be adequate to contain overflows in those high-volume runoff events. The angle. The angle must be enough so that the water runs consistently across the ditch and doesn't pool significantly behind the water bar. The outlet. The outlet must be far enough off the trail so that water doesn't come around the end and re-enter the trail. Before beginning to construct our easy bar, we need to do some planning. First, the location of the easy bar and how many are needed are necessary information before beginning. For this demonstration, we'll assume the operator already has that information. Additionally, the operator needs to decide which side of the easy bar to construct first. It can be done either way, but the decision depends on which direction the operator wants to exit the trail. If he wants to exit towards the log yard, he should plan to construct the easy bar so that when it's finished, the machine is on the yard side of the easy bar. In this demonstration, the yard is downslope from where the easy bar is being constructed. Knowing we want to finish the easy bar on the downslope side, we will begin construction upslope on the inlet. Remember, the quality inlet shouldn't allow water to escape around the end. So we will begin far enough off the trail. At this point, this is easy since the front of the machine and the blade can extend easily off the trail, with the rear end of the machine still located in the trail. We will begin to dig the ditch, pushing the excess material downslope to build the berm. Remember not to make the ditch too deep, since we need the depth to remain consistent the full length of the ditch. Also, digging may not be as easy at the other end of the easy bar. Continue to repeat this step, Extend the ditch until you reach a point when operating the machine and maintaining the proper angle would place the rear end of the machine into the residual stand on the opposite side of the trail. At this point, we will proceed with the machine to the other side to continue constructing the easy bar from the opposite direction, upslope. Don't worry if you have to run over a portion of the water bar as you cross over. You will be able to reach that portion of the water bar easily from the other side to fix anything you might have disrupted. Once we have crossed over, we will begin to construct the water bar headed in the opposite direction. We will be careful to position the machine so that we maintain the same angle of the water bar. We begin by digging the ditch in line with the rest of the ditch already dug. We also want to dig in a manner that maintains the same approximate depth and profile. The material generated by digging will be stored upslope from the water bar for the moment, until the ideal ditch profile is established. When the ditch is established, reach over the mound of stored material with the blade and back drag it through the ditch to place it in line with the rest of the berm downslope of the water bar. The trick here is not to refill the ditch with the material you're attempting to pull through it. To keep that from happening, make sure to apply a lot of down pressure with the blade as you are back dragging that material through the ditch. It's okay to make a couple of passes to make sure the outcome is what you want. Also, use blade down pressure to set the material into the berm. Repeat this process as needed until the water bar extends far enough off the trail and there's no opportunity for water to re-enter the trail. This is easier from the downslope direction, since the machine remains mostly in the trail while reaching with the blade well off the side of the trail. Congratulations! You've constructed a quality water bar using the Easy Bar method. Remember, the key to this approach is installing half of the water bar headed in one direction and the remainder from the other direction. Let's review the 5 quality attributes of a successful water bar. The inlet should start well off the trail so water doesn't get around it. The ditch depth and grade should be consistent in order to direct the water. The mound height should be adequate to contain overflows during high runoff events. The angle of the water bar is important. The water bar should be angled so that water doesn't pool behind the water bar and so that water will run consistently within the ditch. Finally, the outlet must be far enough off the trail so that water doesn't come around the end and re-enter the trail.
Truck safety continues to be a big issue for the forest products industry. There are a lot of factors involved that continue to increase the exposure for our trucks on the open roads. North Carolina continues, and the entire Southeast continues to enjoy population growth, so there are more cars on the road. Production improvements mean our crews are delivering more loads per day and per week than ever before. Average mill distances have increased as well, with drivers logging more miles than ever. And to make matters even worse, the cell phone has increased element of the distracted passenger vehicle driver to new heights. In this environment, many companies and individuals are turning to dash cameras for some digital proof in the case of an accident. We spent some time with Alton Griffin, a truck driver for Catesville Pallet Company, and Matt Greer, a woodyard owner who employs truck drivers. to hear firsthand why they chose to equip their trucks with dash cameras.
I was talking to my wife and, telling her all the close calls and stuff I see, and I told her I wanted a dash cam for Christmas, so she got me one, and I really never really thought about them before, but now I don't. If I had to drive a truck without one, it would make me nervous.
Well, a lot of problems is other people not paying attention to what they're doing, with people on the phone, texting, just people not paying attention really is, distracted drivers, other distracted drivers that are out there. People tailgating our trucks, people trying to pass in no passing zones, and 4 lanes coming to 2 lanes. They try to get around you before the lane closes, which causes a lot of problems, trying to cut our trucks off.
People talking on the cell phones, crossing the yellow line, running in the ditch, passing on a double yellow line. People behind you, if you got a wide load, people can't see what's coming. They just go out there and pass you, and I've had some really close calls with that. People just don't pay attention when they, get out on the old country roads like that. They're looking one way or the other.
What made me decide to get in some dash cams is just reports of my drivers, of what they see every day on the road. People cutting them off, running stop signs right in front of them, pulling out in front of them.
The selection of what product to put in the truck was just a matter of browsing online and through a few catalogs.
When I told my wife, Sarah, I wanted a dash cam for Christmas, she was like, is that really what you want for Christmas? I said, yeah. I found one in a magazine. I told her this was the one I wanted. It had a secondary camera for a rear view, and really didn't talk any more about it, and really didn't think any more about it. And Christmas, that's what I got.
I started looking online and just pulling up different reports, and then I read a lot of reviews of which camera was the best. You could buy any cameras out there for $100 and less, but they seem not to last long. The wide angle, I'd rather have the wide angle view, and I wanted the back camera to be able to keep up with the driver too. There's a lot of cameras with just front facing cameras, and I just did a lot of research online and then made a few calls to a few people and just had questions for them of the camera itself and the features that came with it. And I wanted to be as many features as I could to be able to keep up with the driver.
While the dash cameras provide excellent video surveillance of the truck, they are relatively simple to install either as a temporary or permanent element of the truck.
The camera wasn't that hard to install. It mounts right to your windshield. You put it up in the middle of your windshield at the very top, run the wire. I don't have wires sticking out everywhere. I run it down the side and run the secondary camera on my heated mirror wire, so I already had that. Got a display on it that you can see. You can see down beside the fenders. You got a good view of catching everything.
Putting in a dash cam unit itself, I would say it's as easy. I mean, anybody could do it. It can be as easy as just plugging into the dash itself into the 12-volt cigarette lighter and just sticking it to the window. I mean, it's that easy. You can pay somebody and they'll come out and install it hardwired. It's pretty easy, I would say.
I'm not very computer savvy at all. Working the dash cam and my cell phone, that's about it. I let my kids and my wife help me if I'm on the computer at home. Yeah, I've got 2 cameras on there. You can get them with up to 4, I think. You can even get them wireless, but mine is just front view, and I've got one that you can pretty much put anywhere. You can put it in the cab, driver's side, passenger side, but I mounted mine outside the driver's side mirror, and it gives me a shot down all the way, pretty much all the way down the side of the truck. And the reason I've done that is because I had a very close call on the interstate with a car, and if I'd have had the camera at the time, all I had done was shown the state trooper, and it could have solved for itself. dash cam was, I think, about $160. You can get them cheap, a whole lot cheaper than that. You can get them more than that. You can get them with GPS. You know, mine's just a plain Jane, you know, camera. And I've looked at some more since then. I think the next camera I get is going to have a main front camera and 2 secondary cameras for both mirrors, both driver's side and passenger side. No, the dash cam is very easy. You plug it in, make sure you got the viewfinder in a good position where you want it, and that's all there is to it.
I would say the cost of the dash cam that I chose was roughly around the $200 mark. I installed it myself. It's pretty simple. You can hardwire the dash cam, or you can have a 12-volt plug to plug it in to be able to move it, be portable, or you can hardwire it. And really about 200 bucks, I think, is well worth the safety of the truck and the drivers, and just being able to prove that we're not at fault or we are at fault. The features that I went with on the dash cam was a front facing camera and a rear facing camera that faces the driver, so I can keep up with what's going on with the driver. I wanted to be able to keep up with what's going on in front of him, but also keep the driver what the driver's doing. If he's in there on the phone or talking on the phone or texting, I need to know that, because that's something I won't allow. And the features that I was looking for is to be able to keep up with a GPS location on it, to be able to find out where they're at, to be able to keep up with their speeds, stuff like that, being able to track them at the same time.
The camera's got an SD card. It comes with a card. You can buy bigger cards. They cost a lot of money. I find that if that high-dollar card messes up on you, you've lost a lot of money. So I just buy the smaller, cheaper ones. If I got something I want to save, it rolls over every 6 to 8 hours maybe. When I get to where I'm going and I'm stopped, I have another SD card, and I cut it off, take the one out that I want to save, and put my other one in. Put it in my pocket and hold on to it just in case. There's a few things that I saved at home on the computer, but most of the time, you know, I make sure that I'm okay, nothing's happened, and the next time something happens, I'll switch them out again. The camera, some will run, it depends on how many cameras you have. Some of them will run 6 hours on up to 10 or 12, and then it'll roll over and start, My camera has got a feature you can hit on the remote to save something, but I find it's a whole lot easier than rustling for the remote, just to get somewhere where I'm stopped, switch the card out. I take it home most of the time and look at it on the little iPad. If I think it's something I need to hold on to, I'll save it on that. If not, I'll just put it back in my pocket, and have it for next time.
The elements that my dash cam would track would be their location, their speed, and you can set up parameters with geofence about where they're at, where they've been, and if they've shut the truck off or anything like that, keeping up with their location pretty much all the time and their speed. The GPS unit that we have, the dash cam unit we have, has a memory card in it, and it loops over and over. Depends on the size card you have. You can have one that records up to a week or 2 weeks or whatever, depending on the size card you have in there. And usually I try to pull it out maybe once a month at the most. If I get reports that the driver's doing something, I'll pull it out and see how they're doing and check on. I check the driver, what the driver's doing, and then I check, what their average speed is, and see how they're driving. You'll be able to tell if they're all over the road or if they're trying to run through stoplights or stop signs or anything like that, and just erratic behavior, anything that they might be doing. I just kind of evaluate them from what they're driving.
Drivers and owners alike seem to embrace the ability to prove that they are driving with safety as their #1 priority.
I've always told David about, things that happen and, crazy stuff and close calls that I've had. And I told him I'd got a dash cam and I wanted to put in there, and he had no problem with it at all. And I think myself and him is very happy that I did.
My driver's reactions, me putting the dash cams in, were, basically they were excited because they were able to prove that they're out there, that people are pulling out in front of them and passing them and cutting them off and everything, and the dash cam shows that they're driving, they're doing their job correctly, and they had no problem. My drivers have no problem me putting dash cams in.
In the case of Alton Griffin, he has already had experience with the dash camera supporting his claim that he was not at fault in an accident.
I've had occasions where the cameras really helped me out. One really helped me out, but I've also had a couple been meeting vehicles, and I don't know if they fall asleep or doze off or on their phone, but I've actually had a couple vehicles go off in the ditch and jump a road pipe, come back in the road and almost hit me. And I saved that because, they could go and say, hey, this truck run me off the road. And if they, come up and stop me, I got, the video shows them different. Well, when I got into accident, I immediately told the trooper that I had a dash cam, and he told me to pull the card. He needed the card, and he downloaded it. He gave me my card back. But yeah, that that's means all the world video. You can't dispute that. The troopers, it was, I don't know, 2 or 3. They reviewed it several times. I think they had. I don't know if the guy was in charge, but he reviewed it. They told me that there's nothing I could do. I was not at fault. They were going to send that to the DA, but they didn't see, how any fault whatsoever could be mine. And I was relieved. They gave me the card back, and that was that.
Dash cameras continue to be a relatively low investment when you consider the savings video proof could provide in an accident.
The dash cam is definitely worth the investment. I've driven several trucks, when mine was down or something and without the dash cam, because I kind of mounted mine permanent in mine, and it made me very nervous, and I do not want to drive a truck without a dash cam.
Why is that?
Well, a lot of drivers will say, well, what if it's your fault? Yeah, well, if it's your fault, it's your fault. But I don't want to I would much rather have dash cam than not, because the way I see it, if I'm involved in an incident, it's not going to be my fault. I think I'm a good driver. I mean, yeah, I've had my mishaps just like anybody else, and I'm very patient. That's a lot of people driving cars nowadays are very impatient. I don't care if they're going to the store or work or wherever, they have no patience at all. I think I'm a very patient driver, and all I want is for everybody to get home safe that day, and I'm gonna do my part.
I would say the benefit of me having the dash cams in the truck would be for insurance purposes, and for me to be able to keep up with my drivers. If we had an accident, I could prove that my driver was either at fault or not at fault, and and I would feel better just knowing what my drivers are doing in my truck. Because a lot of the truck, they're not cheap to keep up with, and if they're not took care of, it costs more money. And if you have a driver that's not wanting to take care of the truck, then it's going to cost you more money. I would say the payback of me putting in the GPS units and the dash cams is more of a peace of mind for me, knowing that I'm protected out there against people out there trying to be fraudulent, trying to cause the wrecks to make insurance claim to try to I guess, to put me out of business. And the peace of mind there is well worth the extra little bit of money you have to put into the trucks. Our safety record has been flawless. We have no reports against us, anything. We've had no accidents at all. You know, and that goes to driving, picking out the drivers, to hiring drivers to run your truck. You know, you have to do background checks, you have to get them drug tested.
Greer also added the GPS component to his trucks with a separate GPS unit, about a month before he added cameras.
I got the GPS unit just to be able to keep up with the exact location of the truck at all time, and if it did get stolen, I know where it's at. Keeping up with the speed, the geofence area that I do have access, I can set up parameters where they need to be going. I can pinpoint their speed, how long they ran for. I keep the GPS unit in there for the temperature controls. I can tell you what my temperature gauges are reading. Any dash light cams on, dash lights come on. Anything goes wrong with the truck itself, I'll get alert. You know, it will send my phone that a reading is bad or something goes bad on the truck and it's tied into the computer, then I automatically get a reading on that. Keeps up with the miles, it keeps up with the fuel usage, how much I use, keeps up with trips. I can keep up, I got the odometer reading, I have all the information that's tied to that truck, from the VIN number to fuel miles, the average fuel, how many idle hours, how long the truck's sitting there idling. If it's sitting there running, there's color-coded dots on there from red to green to the yellow. And if it stops, or if it goes outside of a certain area, then it alerts me and lets me know. If it cuts on, you can set up all kind of stuff, reports on it. You can have email reports every morning sitting on your desk at your computer every morning if you would like, for certain trucks, and you can do it, set up every truck that way. The reason why I put it in there, the GPS unit, was that I've had reports of some of my drivers, you know, of their driving behavior, and I wanted to be able to keep up with them a little bit better. And you know, so I need to know if the reports that I'm getting are true or they're false, and just, you know, that I wanted to be able to keep up with my drivers and everything and their driving habits.
In the end, Alton Griffin believes that patience is the secret to safe driving, and he wishes the general public shared his desire to be safe on the roadways.
Patience is definitely a key in truck driving. It can get you in trouble if you're not.
Thanks for watching the Top Update. Here are some important reminders about the Forestry Association's Timber Operations Professional Program. Remember to sign the class roster. Your facilitator will send in that sheet as proof you completed the training. Also, make sure you have the invoice form to send in your annual registration fee, and keep your contact information up to date. The info you provide on this form is where future reminders about the TOP program will be sent. The TOP deadline is June 30th every year. If for some reason you do not complete the TOP update and pay the annual fee by June 30th, you will no longer be considered trained. If you do miss the June 30th deadline, there are 2 ways to be reinstated. Within 3 months, by September 30th, you can make up the missed training and pay a reinstatement fee of $280. After September 30th, the only option is to repeat the TOP 2-day initial training class. Please pay attention to the June 30th deadline and keep your training up to date. If you have any questions about the TOP program or your training status, please contact me at the Forestry Association. You can also check our website at scforestry.org for the latest updates. As an added benefit, everyone who is top trained will receive the Forestry Association Journal, providing information on the top program and to help you stay current on issues affecting our industry. We hope this information will help you improve safety, productivity, and environmental protection on your job. Thanks for your hard work and for all you do for the logging profession.